Hi everybody, welcome to this live broadcast from Fundamental Changes. My name is Jens Larsen, if you don't already know me. I'm not yet an author or a published author by the Fundamental Changes, but that's coming up. And for the rest, you may know me from having a YouTube channel where I talk about mostly jazz guitar and jazz theory. So the way I'm going to do this this live cast is that first I'm just going to talk about how to use some triads as upper structures in solos. That may sound more complicated than it is. I found that the triads are really useful if you want to have some other stuff to work with besides just the basic arpeggio if you're improvising over a chord. So maybe just to get into that, I guess the easiest way to take this is just to start with a C major 7 chord, or a C major 7 scale at least. So we have our C major 7 chord. How is the sound actually? Can you guys hear me okay? And is everything fine? If so, if it's not, then do let me know. So this is the C major 7. We are here. Oh, high up. And then the scale, don't go with that, will be this. And of course, if we take some of the chords, so the most common progression to consider in a C major 7 context is probably just to have a 2-5-1. So let's focus on that. So we have the 2 chord. So the 2nd degree in C is D minor, 5th degree is G7, and then the tonic is the C major. So the idea here is that if we look, of course, if you're improvising on this, you can already start working just with having the basic arpeggios. But it can also just be nice to just take small bits and pieces out of it and also start looking at what kind of triads do we actually have available there, because especially in jazz, we don't really think too much about the triads. We're mostly concerned with the basic harmony, which is going to be a 7th chord. So sometimes it can be just useful to just look a little bit further than that and then just have some other options, because you might just play a melody that's a little bit different if you use a different note set, and if you have a way of thinking of it like that. So that's really the main idea here. The way I think you should check out triads and you're looking for triads is probably because, as you can see here, like I'm talking about a progression that's in a key and in a scale. So all the chords in here are in the key of C major. So I think it makes sense to just start looking at all the diatonic triads that you have in that scale. So for C major, probably if we stick with this position, then the diatonic triads would be something like this. So this exercise is good to have, and of course, when you're playing that, you kind of do need to know that it's C, D minor, E minor, E minor, F major, G7, G. This is the triads. A minor, B diminished, C major, and in that way, think about like figure out which one of those you can use on the different chords. So if we take the 2-5-1, so D minor, G7 to C, then obviously you can take the triad of each of those chords. So you can use the D minor on the D minor 7 chord, you use the G major on the G7 chord, and the C major on the C major 7 chord. But you can also take a little bit further, because if you look at the, let's take the D minor chord, so a D minor 7 arpeggio, so the basic D minor 7 arpeggio, it would be these notes, so D, F, A, and C. And of course, the first 3 of those are just the triads, so D, F, A. The next level of that would be to just leave out the root, but then take the next 3 notes in that chord, and then we have FAC, which is actually an F major triad. And that's also just to connect that to why this is something that we actually use really a lot. This is also what we have. If you have a D minor 7 chord like this, then that's an F major triad with a D in the bass. So that's why that's something that's useful to check out. So if we do that for the D minor, then we have the F major triad. If we do it for the G7, so the third of the G is the B, and the triad we have on the B in a C major scale is a B diminished triad. And then the C major 7. So here you can actually already tell, like, this is an E minor triad, because the third of C is an E, and the triad we have there is an E minor. So, and you can use this to make some lines. This is really just the beginning of starting to add triads to your vocabulary and start to thinking of what triads you can put on top of the chords. And of course, it makes sense to just maybe try and work with this. I think in general, when you're working and you're improvising with arpeggios, it can be a good exercise to just improvise with the arpeggios. But when you're actually using it, then you're not only playing the arpeggios, you're also mixing it up with the scale. And that's also why I'm practicing this in the context of the scale. So I'm practicing the arpeggios, the triads in this case, in the scale, because I'm going to be using it together with notes from the rest of the notes in the scale, really. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, that even though you might be practicing an F major triad like that, then you're probably going to be using it like that in a 2-5-1. So it's going to be these notes, but I'm adding the G running down the scale here, and then let's see if I can remember what I played, but then I went to a B diminished triad on the G7. And again, the main outline of this is just the B diminished triad, but I'm adding scale notes in between. In this case, I'm adding the E in between, resulting to the C major 7. So this is the kind of thing that I would say, for me, is something that I've worked really a lot with. And I think the whole idea of, in this way, you can also, hopefully, I should have written this down, I actually be able to show you on the screen how simple it is to just take D, F, A, C, and then really just stack the thirds further. And in that way, if you're just able to break down the notes in the arpeggio, then you can easily find more triads. And in that way, get some more material. And every time you just have another way of looking at things, you can find new melodies, which I think is really what this is about. So of course, we can also start working with this and then taking it into the extensions. So again, I think the D minor is probably the best place to start with that. So we have our D minor 7 arpeggio here, and then the top part of that right now is an F major triad. Of course, we can also add a 9 to the D minor, and the 9 against the D is going to be an E in this key, and that means that the top part we now have is an A minor triad. And if we do the same with the G7, then we have G7 as being G, B, D, and F. Then the triad that we have on the third is B, D, and F. So that's the B diminished. And then the triad we have on the fifth is D, F, and A, which is a D minor triad. And then of course on the C major 7, so we have first the C major triad, and the E minor triad. So that's the complete C major 7 arpeggio. Then if I add the 9th on top of that, so that's the D against the C, then I get a G major triad. So if I work around that a little bit, again, using these triads, but also mixing it with other notes that are in there, just to sort of create a more natural melody. That could be something like this. So in that way you can just get some other sounds in there. So now I was really mostly going for the A minor triad on the D minor. So of course on the G7 we really get that 9 in there, and that's just a nice extension to add to it. And this is also something that I'll add to pretty much anything that I'll work on, and I'll try to explore. Right now I'm doing it, how you can say, just basically just building on top of the chord. And already now with the 9th we can only add 2 more extensions, then we use the whole scale. But you can also use this in other contexts, and I think I'm going to go on talking a little bit about this for a few minutes just to give you some ideas about where it can be used, and then maybe we can do like some short Q&A section. I can see there are some people around now, so so maybe that's something to do. So the next thing where I would say that you could start using this is if we have like a dominant that's coming out of the diminished scale, because the diminished scale is, I mean, the diminished, if you don't know the diminished scale, the diminished scale is an 8-note scale. It's a symmetrical scale, which means that everything that you play in that scale will be something you can transpose in this case in minor thirds. And this is the sound of it. It can be kind of an abstract thing to improvise with, and if you just run up and down the scale, it's difficult to really make any kind of real music with it. And because it's symmetrical, then you don't have, like, if you're playing up and down a normal major scale, then you will have different points of gravity within the scale, and you can hear it because you can hear where you are. A symmetrical scale doesn't really have that. It's not really tonal. So running up and down it's not going to make for a really strong melody. So one way you can work with that is to start exploring what kind of triads can you find in a diminished scale. And I'm probably, to try and explain this sort of in great detail without writing it out, is maybe a bit ambitious. But if we look at the diminished scale that will go, so the one I'm playing here, which you could consider F diminished, usually you would say that the diminished scale starts with a whole step, so that would be this. And that's the one that I would consider the diminished scale for a G7. Since it's for a G7, so it actually obviously will contain a G7 arpeggio also. And since it's symmetrical, then if it contains G7, then we can actually move this around minor thirds. And moving this around minor thirds, it's going to give us a B flat major triad, a D flat major triad, and an E major triad. So now we have 4 major triads that we can use when we're improvising, and that can be a sort of nice sound to mess around with. And it also really, because the triad in itself, if you're playing, then just that structure is going to make a lot more sense. So you can use that to create melodies that are a little bit more natural sounding, instead of just having sort of this kind of movement, which is a little bit less interesting, I think. So the idea here is that if you are able to look at those 4 triads and then finding ways of working with them. So in this case, if I move them all to this position, then we have the G here. The next one will be the B flat, that's there. D flat, we can do that here, and then E, we can do that here. So now I have all against my root, as you can play the root sometime. And then that it's going to be a sound that we resolve into a C major 7. Of course, most of the time you don't have time to really play all of those triads in one line, so you kind of have to find a way of working with them that actually works. But a nice way of sort of tying them together is to mess around with this idea that when you're playing, we have 2 sets of triads that are a tritone apart. So we have G and D flat, and we have E and B flat. And you can chain together 2 triads that are tritone apart like this. So that's just G, D flat, G, D flat, G. And of course, we can do the same with the other set. So we have B flat, E, B flat, E, B flat, E. And you can use that to make lines that will work. They sort of flow in a nice way across, both across the fretboard, but also just as a melody, it makes a little bit more sense. So if I put that in the context of the 2-5-1, that could be something like that. Small, fairly simple melodies. So that's one of the places where I would take the triads and then go into something that's a little bit more advanced and maybe a little bit further away. Okay, so as there are still a few people around here, I think this is maybe enough as a short presentation on triads and how I'm using that in a jazz context. If you guys have any kind of questions, then let me know. Maybe there's something I can answer. It could be, of course, about anything guitar related, of course. And also, I guess now that I'm anyway doing this for fundamental changes, it makes sense also maybe to mention that I'm a jazz guitar player, and they actually just published a book by Tim Pettingale about jazz blues, and working with bebop. But I actually haven't checked it out myself yet, but it's probably pretty good. So, any questions for you guys? Not everybody at once. No, okay, that's okay. So I think I'll leave it at that then. Thank you for checking out the live cast here, and for the rest, have a nice Wednesday or Wednesday evening as it is here, and hopefully I'll see you guys soon.